CyberHub Engage podcast is sponsored by CyberHub Summit, hosting its second annual Cybersecurity Summit in Atlanta, Georgia on October 10th, 2018, featuring a live tabletop exercise with audience participation, global speakers, engaging topics. Experience cyber different at www.cyberhubsummit.com. Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar. I am your host. Thanks for listening to today's awesome episode. Got a really cool guest with me, and we're going to have an awesome topic for all you listeners today. Before we get started, just want to thank our sponsors and CyberHub Summit and CyberHub Academy. CyberHub Summit has its annual summit coming up next month, October 10th in Atlanta at the City Winery. It'll have a tabletop exercise going on. Led by the Ciso for the state of Georgia, Stan Gatewood, Jeff Hancock, 27 years. You guys have heard him previously on our podcast. The guy's just a general American badass. And Ram Dor, the former CISO for the Israeli Defense Forces. And you can get more information at cyberhubsummit.com. So just, visit our sponsor, give them some support because this wouldn't be possible without them. And without further ado, and respecting your time as listeners and not trying to sell you commercials, I've got the... Nir Valtman, the Ciso for Kabbage, with me. Hey,
hello.
Nir.
Hello.
And Nir is not 8200. I just want to make that clear.
8200.
So Nir is originally from Israel, great guy, and but he's not 8200. Like that was the first thing I was like. So did you do 8200? Because that's what everyone thinks when they think of Israeli cyber dudes. Hey, you were 8200, right? And you weren't.
I wasn't. I was actually in the Air Force.
Micah would love that.
Yeah, in the Israeli Air Force. Okay. Yeah.
The one that shoots stuff down. Tell us a little bit, briefly, about your trajectory into getting into cyber. Because, technically, though, in the U.S., Micah, right? Most of our cyber people are Air Force guys, aren't they? Yeah, Micah said he assumes so if you can't hear him. He doesn't. He hasn't earned his mic yet for the show. We'll get him one soon. But tell us about your trajectory as a CISO. How'd you make Air Force to cybersecurity and you didn't go through 8200? That kind of breaks the Israeli mold of what we think are Israeli cybersecurity folks.
Yeah, well, I know quite a lot of people in 8200, and actually I tried to get accepted to 8200 without knowing that it's 8200. I did my, 13 years in school. I was focused on software development, right? But then when in Israel, and you do the 13th year, then you're like an academic guy, and you can go to more technical roles. So my friend was... I would say the guy that chooses who goes where. And I said, the Air Force have pretty good uniform. It's pretty. It's not green. So
it's white in Israel.
Exactly, right?
It's like an off-white cream color.
It's off-white cream. It looks pretty. I could get chicks or something. And this is pretty much how it ended. I said, well, you're going to the Air Force then. So, I came to the Air Force, and at that time, they had only courses focused on electronic stuff. So they gave me an exam, more specific to electronics, and I was like, all right, let's see what I know. And I started to feel that, and I'm like, okay, I don't know this answer, and pretty much I just submitted an empty exam, and they understood that I have nothing to do with electronics. Fortunately, they opened a course was focused on IT security, like the MCSE stuff, or
right.
MCATP it's called today,
right.
if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they were focused on that. And they just pulled me into this course because they identified that I have some skills with the computers. So yeah, I was there, did the course, and eventually ended up as a trainer in the Air Force for IT and security. And after a few months in the role, I actually bypassed one of the systems that was responsible for scanning for viruses and bringing them into the secret network.
Oh,
So,
that's fun.
yeah, so they said, all right, we got the point. We should probably expand the security stuff in your course. So we just added another week of trainings in security just to make sure that, people understand the implications of what could have happened if I was a malicious guy. So, that's my start in the Israeli Air Force.
The start in IT security. I love it.
Yep.
It's not rare to see. Typically, when CISOs think of Israelis in cyber, we think of vendors, right? A lot of the big vendors in cybersecurity all come from Israel. I haven't seen a lot of CISOs in the U.S. that are Israeli CISOs. That's kind of like a loss to me, right? Because Israel has a lot of cyber talent, but a lot of it goes to product development, everyone trying to make the next big exit. You went the commercial route. Why?
Well, what I'm trying to do is to solve real business problems. Well, security products can definitely do that. I would say security products are usually integrated within the commercial side of the things, as opposed to just, hey, I'm going to buy a security product for myself, or I'm going to buy a lockbox, right? You don't buy a lockbox software for yourself.
Right.
You usually buy a security system for your home, and that's pretty much where it ends. But I was more focused on, let's see what the company that I work for can do for people. So I started with with Retalix as a software company that does point of sales. Right? I wanted to see the point of sales on my day-to-day journey to the stores, and this is how it started. And eventually, when we got acquired by NCR, it was a bit wider, and I saw point of sales and I saw ATMs, and I said, oh, it's pretty cool to be in such a company that you see what it provides to the to the crowd,
to the end user.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see a difference in how cybersecurity is viewed in the U.S. than it is in Israel?
Oh, wow. That's a big difference. So, in Israel, usually it's going to be a very tough sale for a CISO because there are regulations here. You have here, pretty much every standard in every industry that you can think of that you can align with, and people say, thumbs up. You're,
right.
Pretty good in the foundations of security. In Israel, it's a bit different. The way it works is that you need to convince even the CISO that he needs to invest in something, right? So if you're a software vendor, right, and you come to the CISO, the CISO will ask like why he needs you. It's not going to be obvious. And if you manage to sell to an Israeli CISO, you have a pretty good confidence that you will succeed here in the States. Said that, it's not a big success.
Right.
Meaning, if you sell to an Israeli company, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will bump up your valuation if you're a startup or a company that sells products. Actually, I think it's actually the opposite side.
Do you see CISOs in Israel view security differently than CISOs in the U.S., or do you feel like they have the joint pains and complications and challenges? Is the CISO challenge, my question is the CISO challenge global, or is it more, well, in the U.S., the CISO has more challenges than one in Israel or one in, Germany or Poland or whatever?
I think that the foundations of the challenges are the same across the world. Meaning, you always need to handle the people, the process, and the technology.
Right.
This is eventually the three pillars of what CISOs try to solve, right? In the States, it's going to be more regulated, more standard. In Israel, you have certain regulations. You have regulations for banking, you have regulations for insurance and stuff like that. But the regulations, according to my knowledge, and I was working consulting in Israel as well. Here, it's a bit more scalable and standardized as opposed to Israel, which you just need to translate the words. It's like taking the GDPR requirements,
right,
and translating them into an Israeli technology.
Gotcha.
Standards.
You're a very business oriented CISO. I mean, our conversation, we didn't talk security. You talked about how can I be of assistance to our business team as a security aspect. Where did you develop that mindset, and how do you share that across? How do you get that message to other CISOs who have a lot on their head, but if they become business drivers, they can obviously get more done that way?
I think it's a survival instinct. Right? So, it started from NCR actually. When again, you need to have the same battle over budgets. It's something that everyone handles all the time. But what I started to understand is that when I want to get something done, I need to see the benefit on the other side. So it can be application security, it can be IT security, it can be anything. So let me give you an example, and I think it will emphasize the whole idea, right? So let's say in application security, because it's easy to explain that. You decide that you want to have a static code analysis, right? It's a pretty standard thing that companies tend to do for their products,
Right.
right? So with static code analysis, you say, well, I want to check for security vulnerabilities, right? But that's your thing, right? It's
Right.
not what the engineering teams are interested in. The engineering teams are interested in quality, right? So you tell them, hey, I'm going to pick a product with you together that will solve your quality problem. And by the way, it will solve also the security problem for me. So you make sure that they are satisfied with what they need, and then you get what you want. So it can be that. It can be applicable for IT security. It can be like, let's talk about BCP, right?
Right.
With BCP, it's just, it's a process backed up by technology. But with BCP, who drives it? Usually a Ciso drives it,
Right.
right? But BCP is only a small portion of it, right? It's like portion of the availability within security. So with BCP, say, all right, I'm going to work with the stakeholders and make sure that their business is not interrupted. I will just be the one who executes it, right?
Right.
So in terms of communication, you just need to make sure that the party that you provide the service to is satisfied, and then you get what you want. And it can be applicable for everything that you communicate.
How can CISOs, there's a lot of different types of CISOs out there today. Obviously, there's a workforce shortage. We've spoken about it on this podcast plenty of times. Finding qualified people in cybersecurity. And then for organizations, sometimes it's even finding a qualified CISO to run an organization. I know of CISOs who were CTOs, have no security background, that are in CISO positions, and I know of others who were, COOs or CFOs who are, in charge of CISOs. That tends to be a challenge for a lot of CISOs. How do you kind of get over that hump? I mean, in your opinion, as someone who drives business, how do you communicate effectively as a CISO with these business people so that you get them on board without using the fear factor?
Well, the fear factor is definitely something that is widely used. But I think at the end of the day, it ends with a risk appetite, right?
Right.
And you refer to that as a fearing factor. But at the end of the day, you just need to tell the whole story, right? People like stories. So if you come with a story and say, well, we run our business, these are the things that tend to happen in the market. It's not what could have happened to us. It's just the data, right? So when I'm going and presenting to executives, it's always going to be backed up with some data. So it can be backed up with budget numbers, like, the average spending in financial services is this in 2018, for instance, right? Or it can be the amount of companies in financial services that have board participation in security budgets is this. Or it even can be, what is the amount of companies having a Slack channel to support their teams only for security. So it can be that narrow or that wide, right? And at the end of the day, when you come with data, the people that you present to can make more quick decisions, because they say, all right, if I'm comparing myself to others, if the others are in that level, in that maturity level, let's say 3 out of 5, and we're at like 2.5 out of 5, then this is this gap that we might want to align with. It's just everyone buy a Prius. You'll probably think about buying a Prius, right?
Most of Hollywood started the Prius revolution.
Exactly.
It was Hollywood that started the Prius revolution. It was saying, actors, instead of getting into Mercedes S500s, getting into Prius and saying, I care about the environment.
Exactly. So it's all about that, about showing what is going on in the market, compare yourself to the other companies in your market, right? And then just provide this data. So this is one portion of your question. The second portion is the talent shortage, right? I don't think we need to emphasize why we have it.
We have it.
We have it, right?
It's there.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of automation. Everything that I can automate, I will do that. And I will even get more support to do that. Because you show some cost savings. Labor cost just goes up. And with automation, you need to invest some money into making that happen. But then the operation cost will not go up. So you can justify putting in automation.
But so I'm going to challenge you on this, because this is the real reason I brought you here today, because we were going to talk, I told you we were going to talk automation. So do you really feel like machines and automation can be more effective than people?
Yes. And I think that in certain domains, it's a clear yes. In certain domains, it may be less applicable. Meaning, if you want someone to write a policy for you, maybe a machine would be a mistaken choice. Right?
That's a bad idea.
Right. But, if you want to automate your patching, for instance, and, let's talk about patching because it's a big problem, right? A lot of companies has it. A lot of breaches happen because of that, right?
Right. I mean, there's challenges with patching, obviously, because also its impact on a company's, you can patch something and all of a sudden it takes down your system for 3 days while you try to fix, what the patch did.
Exactly. So, and that ties back to the thing I spoke about solving others' problems, right? So patching is a security thing, really a security thing, right? But patching also has not only security stuff, right? It also has, bugs, performance issues that it tends to solve. So anyway, a company needs to go through the patching practices. If the company is mature enough, and if I will come up with an automation solution, the company has to have certain foundations in automation. So, QA today, or DevOps, so-called, it's something that tends to be more mature, and there are certain tools that can support your, let's say, CI/CD pipeline, right? And because that's the trend today. When you have good enough testing, you can actually make sure that any patch that you will apply will work or will not be introduced into production. So with QA, it can be sanity tests, it can be just simple performance tests, right? You run everything through your pipelines, and one of the pipelines can be let's test security. It's just application security as well. And in those pipelines, if you see different results, like there are tools that even can measure the time it takes a server to respond while you do your testing, and it's not necessarily a security tool, not necessarily a performance tool. It's just detects anomalies, right? Not security anomalies.
Right.
And in that case, if you can just integrate into the process and say, well, we have a chef script. I'm getting technical, but it's just an example. I have a chef script that just does all of the updating to the operating system as part of the deployment. Yeah, sure, do that. And if something fails, don't promote it to production, and we'll test it. Right?
The common theme that we hear today, whenever anywhere, is AI, machine learning, deep learning, and automation, right? So, you hear it from a lot of different companies and a lot of different emerging technologies where, I've got the latest, greatest thing, and it's AI, and it's machine learning, and it's deep learning. That kind of ties into automation, right? Because technically that's supposed to be like, oh, it learns on its own, and it develops a mind of its own, and it learns how to counter people on its own.
Yep.
Do you buy into that theory?
I buy into that theory in certain places. And let me explain you. So, there are a lot of EDR solutions, endpoint detection and response solutions, and a lot of them are based on all of those buzzwords, right? I have AI, deep learning, machine learning, whatever, right?
Right.
And for oh,
We're bumping the mic here.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
So for those solutions, it's really endless battle.
Right.
Someone will always find a way to bypass it. Said that, let's talk about other technologies that it can be very well there. It can work very well there. So if it's let's say container, software containers, today it's always going up in the hype.
Right.
With containers, you can actually whitelist the processes running within a container while you test the software, right?
Okay.
And then when you whitelist it based on, just examining what is running all of that time, it's not exactly machine learning or AI, but it's a algorithm that eventually tests what you have and examines it over time and eventually builds a profile. If you take that profile and put it in production, there is almost zero risk for having a false positive, because when you test your software and you have good enough coverage, the possibility that someone will go into a different process will be, very low. So there are certain places that I will definitely get more of the machine learning, AI, deep learning, and there are certain places where I won't.
When we talk of workforce shortage, excuse me, and we talk about workforce shortage and we talk about automation, right? And you have a very, very good point on automation. You go, hey, anything that I can automate that doesn't require me to have people here is great. Automating systems still requires people to kind of monitor and run them, right? Because sometimes, nothing's perfect. So the challenge to still get qualified people is real. But do you think that if you could automate as much as you possibly could, how much labor force would that save you?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on where you put the automation. Let me give you an example. Phishing campaigns. Right? It's a common thing that companies do. For phishing campaigns, usually you need some labor to either design the pages, choose the people, build the content, manage those campaigns, track if the campaigns went through. So this is labor, right?
Right.
It can be maybe, let's say 20% FTE. I'm just throwing that out.
Okay.
Right? It depends on the size of the company. It depends of
20%. But I can tell you, I can give you feedback from someone who's asked this question all the time. 20% is about the average FTE. So you're fine. You're pretty much nailing it on the head.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much what I estimated. So
right.
It's good to have this feedback.
Yeah, it's 20% is a good number.
Yeah. So you have this 20%, and you calculate how much costs a security analyst, and then you look at other tools and you see, well, is there any tool that can do the full thing for me, and I will not need to spend $1 of FTE into this product? And there is a product, right? The only thing that I want to have from such a company is reporting. I want to see what's going on. I want to see the people that are fooled around. I want even to automate the people that click the link. I want them to appear in the next campaign, right? I want them to get educated. All of that can be automated. So if you can find an algorithm or a company, it doesn't matter how you look at that, because MSSP also solves part of the problem, not exactly through automation, but it's also a thing that you can shift over to someone with relatively low cost.
Right.
If you can do that and take that through all the pillars of security, just find the places where you can save even a little bit. In this case, 20%, it's quite a lot.
I mean, that gives you more flexibility with your budget.
Well, the budget is the budget, right? You ask for a budget and you justify the budget in some way, right? To justify the budget, you need to go through an automation discussion. Say, hey, I'm saving some money on those types of solutions by doing that. And then, it's just an easy sell.
You've been in your role now at Kabbage, I think, for what, 2 months?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
They're obviously lucky to have you, but what were some of your, a lot of times new CISOs step into a role And, one common theme I always hear from CISOs is, you got to kind of understand you're never going to fix it all. You're always going to have a list that continues to grow, and you got to prioritize what to work on. If you could look at, right now, looking back at your first 60 days, what were some of your top 3 priorities when you got into the organization, and why?
Yeah. So the top 3 were obviously education. I know that when I just got in, a lot of people spoke about security. I said, wow, it's awesome. People understand security. People want security. Because when I came in, we actually had certain people that were, doing security part of their jobs. It's like a champions program without actually establishing a champions program. So I wanted to scale it up, and this is one of the things that I was looking at: education, making sure that people understand not only the foundations of security, the ISMS standards, but also how to handle with phishing and how to handle with these types of attacks. And how important it is to have a certain password policy. This is, by the way, pretty cool example, because a lot of people get into the job of a CISO, and then they kind of they open the ears for 3 months, and then decide what to do. But we're less than 500 people at this point, and it allows you to run very quickly. So one of the things that I did is just I ran a survey with not all people, but with good enough number of people. And I asked, what would be the password policy that you'd prefer to have? Mm-hmm. And there is the default stuff that you can probably see in other companies, like the 8 characters with complexity, and you need to change the password every 30 days or 90 days, depends.
Or never.
Or never, right? So, I asked people, what are they interested in? What is the top disturbing thing with passwords? And people said, well, we hate changing passwords, right? So, if you look at NIST, and, NIST provide pretty right. good standards about, how passwords should be. Like how long they are, like 15 characters or 16. I can't recall. What was it?
16, I believe.
16? Yeah, so it was 16. And then, they said, you don't need complexity. You don't need this and you don't need that. And when you look at the whole thing, you can provide an alternative to the people and say, well, you don't want to change passwords. That's how it's going to be. And people just voted, and we took the action on it. So, this is how quickly, we can change the awareness and be more an enabler for the people, right? For the employees of the company.
Right.
The other thing that, the second thing that was extremely critical for me is, knowing what I don't know, right? You can call it threat detection and response. You can call it cyber resilience. But eventually it was, identifying what I don't know and how do I enable the business to know things related to security that they don't know yet. So, we're a fintech company, obviously. With fintech, you have a lot of fraudsters trying to gain,
especially in your line of business.
Yeah, especially in my line of business.
You lend people money.
Exactly, right? So people will always try to trick you. And, fortunately, we have pretty good automation around that, right? We have very low, rate of people that get to the manual process beyond the computer. So for that process, you want to see if there is any security tool that can assist the fraud team to identify fraud. One of the things is like, threat intelligence. It's something that I'm just looking at right now, but, would you be able to go to the deep web and look for identities stolen and eventually mark those as, potentially fraudulent accounts and just double check them or have additional check with them?
So let me challenge you on that one real quick. A local Atlanta company was breached about a year ago this month, wasn't it, when it was announced? It was September of last year. It's called Equifax. I'm sure you've heard of them.
No, I never heard about this company.
147 million Americans. How could you do business if you marked 147 million Americans in your system as possibly having their information being compromised and fraudulent accounts?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the thing is that I don't tend to store any information within Kabbage. The idea is to utilize a service that you can just query and say, hey, are you familiar with this account? Is it somewhere within your threat intelligence threads? And if it is, let's take a look at this. And if it's not, maybe it's safer to proceed with this account. Said all of that. It's at this point it's just an idea or example.
No, I get it. It's a good example. I mean, what you're saying is very valid, and I hope, it's a way to look at it and go, all right, this is really good. But so many people's PIIs out there right now.
Correct.
So many.
Yeah, but fraud, when you look at financial fraud, it usually requires not only the PII or not only the social security number. Excuse me. It requires a little bit more than that. So with fraud, you will with financial fraud, you will always look for, not always, in many cases, you will look for full identity theft. Right. As part of the information gathering that the criminals doing, they get the social security, they get the phone number, they can spoof the phone number and even get the text message for MFA. But at the end of the day, they are looking for bank account compromise. They look for bank account details, because if they can get there, the path to get any service from anyone would be much easier. So what I would be looking for is not only whether the social security number is compromised, I would look for what exactly is compromised, if that makes sense.
It does. What you're describing right now is a Ciso being an enabler of business.
Exactly.
I titled this podcast "Cisos Are in Sales Because of You," because our conversations have always been, how can I drive business growth as a Ciso and not limit efficiency? And obviously you work at a very lean organization. And unfortunately, some Cisos don't, right? They work in very wide organizations that are, horizontally very, very wide. They have to go through a lot of hoops to even enact the littlest of changes, like adding 2 or 3 characters to a password can be a tedious 3-4 month battle to get ops to sign off on it and executive branch to sign off on it. And you're going through a journey to get 3 more characters added to people's passwords, because that can really, tick people off the wrong way. And you're kind of lucky on that. But how can Cisos be better business enablers and really focus on supporting the business while defending it?
So I think it all starts from relationships within the company. I think that I'm not the only one who says that,
right.
But I will emphasize it. So building a relationship is not only, having a good, hey bro, let's talk about it. It's more about understanding the needs of the different stakeholders in the company, right? And this is, one point. The other point is also understanding the needs of the customers of the company. Because at the end of the day, although you're not exactly the liaison for the customer, you want to make sure that everyone are happy. So, if you're trying to address something and marketing is not going to be happy with that, let's say you put a CAPTCHA in the login screen. Marketing is not going to be happy with that.
No,
a lot of people can be happy with that in the company.
Right.
Marketing will not be happy. So you need to figure out through the channels what are the interests of all of the stakeholders, and based on that, build your story, right? So I'll just give you an example from previous things that I did. So one thing is looking at security internally, right? So you can have all of the policies and technologies to protect the company, from being on the news. That's pretty much the definition, right?
Right now, unfortunately, that you are true.
Yeah, and on the flip side, you want to be an enabler for the customer. So, for instance, in a B2B business, if someone buys a piece of hardware or buys your software, you want to be able to support that maybe with an additional piece of software, maybe an OEM software. So it's a CISO role with a product management role where you can probably find partners to work with and sell something, not necessarily sell in a in a dollar amount, but maybe sell as a maybe marketing, maybe just to reduce the risk. You just need to understand what are the interests of the different stakeholders.
We talk about business enablement in cyber, and you hear a lot of different challenges for a lot of CISOs with enabling business growth, budgeting, which we don't need to talk about because that's just talked about everywhere. You could never have enough money for security. But a lot of times I think we always forget about that sleeper threat, that insider threat. How can technology support identifying people who are within the organization that are a real threat to the security of the organization?
Well, I think, you highlighted it. It's technology, right? So with technology, there are certain products that, can identify certain threats, but not the whole thing. Like you have products like DLP and UEBA that can identify some of that threat. But at the end of the day, someone will have access to, Salesforce, and it's an authorized user. And he may be able to change, certain fields according to his need. Or, it can be even a cashier that, that voids a transaction and, buys a lot of goods. It can be anyone that eventually does things based on his authorization. In that case, I think there is no thumb rule in that case. It's just you leverage the tools that are available, like I said, DLP, UEBA, and obviously auditing. And if you can automate that and identify anomalies in that audit, that's awesome. Although it's a very difficult problem to solve.
See, I was speaking at a conference at NCR about 2 months ago. It was July, I believe. And I look at Micah always because I try to remember dates, and Micah typically sucks at reminding me what dates they are. I'm kidding, Micah. But in one of the things I was discussing was user behavior analytics for insider threats. Because I actually believe that there is a way to map out a average user behavior. And then there's a way to create alerts. If there's a way to create alerts within a system that alerts, someone in security that goes, this behavior's user is out of context. Meaning if you have a call center, call centers have a lot of access to a lot of data because their job is to support a customer. And they're, by the way, the highest turnover employees in the business. The people who are have access to data, who are typically, kind of at a job where they quit often, right? And they're a real threat. You were saying that before we even got here. You go customer support, like that's how I would go. Social engineering, customer support, because their job's to support the customer, right?
They will make you happy.
So isn't there don't you think that there's a way to map out a standard behavior of an agent and then essentially set up, I hate to use the word beacons or alerts, to identify anomalies within behavior?
Well, I think the UEBA concept is awesome, right? The fact that you can actually learn what would be a profile and kind of tie that to specific roles. It can be users, it can be roles. It really depends on the implementation. But the whole idea is awesome because you can identify something that is abnormal, as you said. Like UEBA had a pretty good success with salespeople that left companies because they just tried to pull all of the customer lists, and that was triggered.
Right.
Right. Said that. Excuse me. Said that.
Do you need some water?
I have some water. Yes.
Having said that, user behavior analytics are
prone to false positives. It goes back to the question about machine learning, AI,
deep learning,
all of that stuff. Those products are based on that, and it doesn't matter how you apply those algorithms. You will always have false positives. So as long as you have the labor to support UEBA and you understand that you will have false positives, and you understand that you will need to manage that, like managing, it's a SOC thing, right?
Right.
And you understand that you need to expand the SOC capabilities eventually. That would be an awesome implementation. There are things that you can do to reduce the risk a little bit. So you can always check for authorization. You can always check for what people are doing as part of their job. You can even shadow the salespeople or shadow the customer support and see where they access. For instance, would you like to see the customer support accessing social security numbers of customers? Do they really need it, or maybe they need only the last four to identify the identity, right? So those are type of things that you can do to minimize the risk. And lastly, one of the things that I am a big fan of is bug bounty programs, but not a bug bounty program in the traditional way that you're familiar with, as a bug bounty program where you give the public to hack your apps.
Right.
I'm talking about a bug bounty program or a security bounty program where you publish it internally, and then anyone in the company can submit bugs to you based on whatever they see. It can be it can be a configuration issue. Maybe too many people have admins or on workstations, or maybe customer support can see some privacy information. All of that can be just submitted through a security bounty program, and then people get rewarded. And those are the things that you will never catch from a security department, because you don't have all of those resources to understand the full spectrum of the business process, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I love the idea of an internal bounty program. I think that most of the time people within the company know of issues but feel like their voices are unheard. Like, oh, it doesn't matter what I do. No one's really going to take me seriously because I'm a customer support agent, because I'm just some sales guy in Montana, right? I'm not really the guy who's sitting at headquarters and bumping, shoulders with people at the water cooler or, the beer fountain, that you're telling me about, because now I kind of want to have a beer, but I can't. This is horrible. But those are obviously, great ideas, and you've enacted them. And I kind of want to go back, because I asked you a question. We got through one, but we didn't get through the other two. And I want to go back to that. So you're in your new role. You said the first thing you looked at was passwords and surveys, and you kind of did that survey, and you what are the other things that you looked at as you came into your role?
Yeah, so we spoke about the people, education.
Right.
We spoke about the identifying threats and responding to them. And lastly is the automation. What are the types of things we can do to automate everything that we do? Because with, let's say Kabbage is a bit different from, lending companies or financial companies. While, if you look at many companies, as their business they grow the amount of people need to support the business. While with Kabbage, we spent a lot of money on technology. And while the business grows, the technology makes the decisions. So my goal is to avoid growing the labor focused on tasks that can be automated. And that's the reason why, it ties back to my wish to automate stuff within our processes. Usually it's going to be, a DevOps effort.
Right.
So, even if you think about, the whole process that we work with, like, we have ticketing system. We have, in that ticketing system, I would see every system integrates with that. So let's say you ran your tests, and when you patched the system and it failed, you want to know about it. You want to open a ticket for someone to investigate it. You just don't want to put an alert in Slack and see if someone responds to that. You want to make everything managed. So all of those things are tied up together to eventually minimize the labor hours spent on repeating tasks.
Kind of final thing here, because I want to take a look at time. So we're kind of mindful of it. But this conversation is so much fun, I don't want to end it. As a Ciso, you obviously cross hairs with a lot of different departments, because you have a say on operations, legal, privacy, and it's not just consumer privacy, it's employee privacy. What's really private for an employee? And I think the U.S. is different from Israel in that aspect. In Israel, when I lived in Israel, I knew I had no privacy.
Yep.
Very little.
Pretty much.
I think the only privacy I had was in the shower. right? I mean, I'm happy I had that privacy.
At least something.
It's something, right? But your privacy was in the shower. In the States, it's different. Do you feel like privacy hinders security in that aspect, or do you feel like security has to be better in order to respect privacy?
I think both are parallel channels, right? Uh, Security usually goes towards detecting stuff in the company or protecting the systems of the company. Privacy has two portions of it, right?
Right.
You mentioned the employees of the company
And the consumers.
and the consumers eventually. And the way that that I foresee that is that it needs to work side by side, privacy and security. A CISO usually doesn't do the privacy heavy lifting. It supports the privacy strategy,
Right.
which is driven by someone else. Like due to GDPR, as you know, companies must have DPOs. So, right?
Listen, I'll interrupt you there for a second because I want to share this, but I want to tell you as well. I know of companies who have taken people out of, we spoke about the work shortage. So they've taken qualified people in cybersecurity and moved them to be DPOs and work in legal because of GDPR. Mind boggles me. We don't have enough people, but now let's take the people we know that are in cyber, that can operationalize cyber in your organization, that are key assets in a team, and let's move them to legal so they can be DPOs because the Europeans, have their own little bullshit thing that they like to do.
Well, we'll have our bullshit soon, right? Have a CCPA, so California getting into this.
Right,
and
Colorado just announced that they're going to do something similar to us.
Yeah, and the way it works is that we'll probably see more states
we
getting into this.
We need to get a federal law in place because with data breach notification being that you got to, I'm preaching to the choir here. 50 different states, you got 50, and there's no one definition of what a breach is. Not one.
That is correct. California
defines a breach different than Georgia does, than New York does, than Illinois, than Montana, Rhode Island. It goes on. That's you spend more time worrying about that stuff than you do actually about securing your organization.
Luckily, that's not me. Because there is a separation, and it should have, companies should have the separation between privacy and security. Privacy, as you highlighted, it's right. Privacy usually tends to be under legal, right? It can be under legal, under risk, under whatever business that is focused on the consumer aspect side of the things, or consumer or customer if it's a B2B company.
Right.
So, in security, you will always have someone to support this strategy, because usually you'll just need someone who knows how to translate legal to technical, or legal to ops, or legal to HR, or eventually go and tie up your controls, so-called, into the standards or litigation stuff. So with privacy, I agree that it may not be the wisest decision to get a security guy into a privacy legal position. Said that, there are things that you can do with security people. You can, there is a CIPT certification. It's the CIPP, but with a T, which is the technologist. It's the certified privacy technologist. These people can definitely be educated to be privacy subject matter experts and address the needs, but they will not be the ones who define when to report on a breach, because that would be more legal work.
Yeah, I get what you say. I'm always worried because it's one of those where in this country we talk a lot about privacy. Privacy is a very big deal for a lot of people. But a lot of times you can't have security without having privacy, without giving up some part of your privacy. When you want to fly, you go through TSA. And what do you do if you don't have pre-check? Take off your belt, your shoes, take your laptops out of your bag, take your liquids out of your bag. You don't have a lot of privacy there. So it's my thing is, do you feel like we should keep addressing privacy as a security? Is privacy a security risk?
Privacy is definitely a security risk. Because if you think about the business again, if there is a privacy breach, it also ties up to security, because it usually happens just because someone bypassed a system or managed to trick a person, or bypassed one of the people, process,
Technologies.
right? And all of that is tied up to security. So privacy is definitely an issue that needs to be taken care of within security. Not owned by security, though.
Not owned by security, but I mean, I always say that a CISO should have a little bit more say over things in an organization. They should be more involved in the CTO, CIO, COO's conversation of, hey, we're implementing this new technology. Hey, this is how we're thinking of implementing it. Hey, this is how we want to operationalize it. And the CISO should be right there going, all right, this is what my team needs to do here. This is how we need to implement it here. And this is how we operationalize it here. And I hope more organizations that listen to our podcast kind of get that and understand that the CISO isn't the enemy of the organization. Rather, he's kind of, that lone soldier in the guard tower that's trying to keep the bad guys from getting over the wall.
Right, and if you have a good cooperation between privacy and security, you can actually tie it up to, to the requirements that GDPR, for instance, has. Right, you have privacy by design and default. You can definitely tie security into the process and say, well, there's a privacy stuff that we'll need to do, but hey, if you involve security, we will also solve other problems that you may have, and we'll just make sure that the whole cycle is just a business enabler for you. Because with privacy, it's a little bit more difficult debate to say, hey, I will enable your business.
Right.
With privacy, it's just, hey, we need to align with those requirements, and these are the litigations that we need to follow. If you tie those together and you make a business claim saying, hey, I will solve this problem, or I will minimize the risk of a data breach, it can also be solved as part of the privacy by design efforts, or privacy by design and default.
Nir, thank you for being with us today, man.
Thanks for the invitation.
It was awesome. I really enjoyed the conversation. I kind of want to keep it going, and we will, I'm sure. So if you're listening, thank you, Nir, for being here. You're listening to the Cyber Hub Engage podcast, and obviously this has been a longer than usual podcast, I would say. So if you've been able to muscle through it, which I think you should be able to, because there is no boring piece here. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be right back after this message from our sponsor and some announcements coming up for the next few weeks, because next week I will have the NKIC director on the show, Mr. John Felker, who has a very, very difficult position within our federal government of dictating that. Nir will be joining us for a nice little dinner with John, and we'll be talking to him. So you can find me on Twitter, James_Azar1. So tweet me some questions you want to ask John, or some questions you have about the NKIC. And we'll be right back after this message. Cyber Hub Engage podcast is brought to you by Cyber Hub Summit. Cyber Hub Summit is the leading executive cybersecurity education forum, hosting their second annual event in Atlanta, Georgia on October 10th. You can find out more at cyberhubsummit.com.